And we're live. Welcome to Don't Be Coy. I'm your host, Unkle Lew, and today I have the honor, pleasure, and the utmost appreciation to have with me today Mr. Brandon Erby. Brandon, thank you for being on the show. How are you doing this afternoon?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. How's your previous week been, man?
The week has been good. I was finishing up my second year at the University of Kentucky, and it's been a roller coaster as a start, but it's been good. It's been good to kind of bring it down and start the summer off.
No, I totally understand that, man. So, for the people at home, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, no problem. So yes, I'm Brandon Erby. I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky. I'm in the Writing, Rhetoric, and Digital Studies department, also affiliate faculty in African American and Africana Studies. And I'm originally from Saginaw, Michigan, and I went down to Unkle Lew College for undergrad. And after that, I went up to New Jersey. I got a master's degree there, and then over to Penn State for another master's, and ultimately my PhD. All of my degrees are in English, and I also have a background in African American studies as well. So it's been it's funny. Today, I believe, is Unkle Lew College's commencement, and so class of 2022. This marks 10 years that I've graduated from Unkle Lew. So,
oh wow,
it's been it's crazy to think about the last 10 years and everything that has happened. But I'm sure we'll probably get into a little bit of that. But that's I guess my academic my academic story. But as you can see, a lot of my academic pursuits have kind of dominated my life in the last several years.
Yeah, no, man, I totally understand that, and you're absolutely right. I think I really want to touch on as you said, like your academic career, because even within that, I think that there's various different layers to it, and like what I've always admired about you is especially how you've taken this academic pursuit or just your pursuit towards your career, but you've also been able to hit a lot of those key milestones and have this kind of parallel life that you go with it. So I'm really excited for the conversation we're going to have today, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
For sure. So as you were talking about earlier, and just the pursuit of your career is taking you to many places, like originally from Michigan down to Mississippi, up to New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Kentucky. Can you talk a little bit as far as what started this passion towards African American studies, African American rhetoric?
Yeah, so I knew when I was thinking about college, I knew that I wanted to attend a HBCU. And the reason for that is because I just wanted to be around Black people, but I also knew that I wanted to be a part of a tradition or a legacy of Black excellence in academia. And so when I got to Unkle Lew, I had in my mind that I wanted to be a lawyer, and I knew that I wanted to, think about writing as a way to get me closer to my dream of becoming a lawyer. But as I started, taking English and writing classes, I realized that there was a whole side of English studies that I had not known about. And I'm just talking about African American literature. And so really thinking about the things that I was reading and how these Black writers were, not necessarily writing about issues that were just mundane or, for entertainment or what have you, but they were also being really critical about the worlds that they were living in. And, thinking that their writing could help make our world better. And, shine light on the good and the positive aspects of Black people, Black culture, and not always addressing, negative stereotypes. I thought that was really fascinating. And so that's how I, said, maybe I don't really want to be a lawyer. Maybe I want to think about these readings a little bit more. Think about how these writers are addressing the world, addressing social political issues a little bit more. And so that's at Tougaloo is when I really started thinking about African American studies and African American literature as a legitimate form of communication.
Mm.
And so a couple of places later, when I get to Penn State, I started to get into rhetoric a little bit more, because the thing about literature for me is I was always confined with like fiction. And so I was reading the novels, I was reading the short stories, I was reading poetry. And, a lot of that work, while it was addressing like real life issues, it was still seen as works of fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that, that was cool, but I wanted to also like bridge out and address the ways that people are writing in real time, and to think about how people are, using language, using communication skills to address real life events, or to address their real lives and particular historical moments. And so that's why I started to get into rhetoric, because that then allowed me to look at not only the literature, but look at speeches and look at, what kind of discourses are happening on television and news media. And so I just, broadened my perspective out to think about the different ways that people communicate and use language, use writing, that's not confined to novels and literature and poetry, but to just think about the daily ways that we engage in public life. And so that may be with speaking, that may be with writing, but that may be with, using our bodies to march and to protest, or to do other types of things on social media or other types of digital engagement. And so I just took my love for writing and literature and I broadened it out to, think about rhetorical and public discourse as a whole.
Yeah, no, I think that that's really interesting, especially like when we think about just like African American literature or just African American studies. Like, you're right, like it's a lot of history around, like, obviously the civil rights era, different things of that nature. And more so, as you were talking about focusing on the rhetoric of like today's time frame, like how do you feel like from just your perspective of just studying the material, how like the different forms of like media and the different forms of like how we communicate, or ways that we can communicate, ways that we can communicate has changed over time, and impacted the message, not necessarily to say that it's watered it down or anything of that nature, but like been able to reach the audiences that it's been able to reach, but even reaching an even broader audience than maybe even before.
Yeah, so I think, for me, it's always about what are people doing with the resources that they have in their moment, in their particular moment. And
Mm.
so I studied the civil rights era, and I've looked at political activism and the ways that people kind of resist dominant, modes of power. And I'm always interested in seeing, well, what did they do with what they had then? And what you see is the message doesn't necessarily change. It's just the medium.
Mm.
And so, for instance, I did my dissertation on Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley, his mother. And so for me, I always wanted to address what Emmett Till's mom did with her son's casket, and how she used his casket to open up, a political or activist call for others to engage in, civil disobedience, and to try to bring attention to racial justice issues. But what she did with that casket is what we see with many people doing today with their cell phones and with their social media platforms, when they're trying to bring awareness and attention to racial injustices. And so, if we think about Mamie Till opening up Emmett Till's casket in 1955, but we also think about what a 17-year-old Darnella Frazier did with her cell phone in 2020 to document, the death of George Floyd. they're doing identical things. They're doing identical rhetorical things.
Mm,
Their audiences are public, the public and the nation at large, to try to resist and fight back. But with that, 60 plus year gap, one is using a casket, one is using another piece of technology. And so that's what is fascinating to me, is that the work is ongoing. It seems like we're constantly engaging in ways of resistance and trying to make the world better, but we're always using the different technologies available to us at our particular time. And even if we talk about, someone, years before Mamie Till Mobley, like Ida B. Wells, who is doing the same type of work about lynchings in America, and who's getting lynched and the numbers of people getting lynched and why they're getting lynched. She's an investigative reporter.
yeah.
And so she's using writing, she's using data, she's using, numbers and statistics to document these things. Maybe to only use the casket, people today are using their cell phones, but it's all for this, larger work of racial and social justice. And so that's the type of stuff that I'm interested in, that no matter the time period, what are the means of which people are engaging in the work?
Yeah. So I'm going to make a little bit of a shift here, a little bit of a pivot, because I think that you brought up something, two different things that I really thought that you brought up was really interesting. One related to like this aspect of like Black excellence, and like you saying that you wanted to be a part of that legacy of Black excellence. So like you went to an HBCU. And then as far as even with dedicating your career towards focusing on like African American studies, and like how like people may utilize the different resources that they have to tell whatever is the story at that particular time. I'm curious around like, even for yourself, like, because you're at a very interesting crossroads, right? Like you've mentioned earlier, you spent the last 10 years focusing on your like academic career, but then at the same time, during those past 10 years, you got married, you've had a child, all these different like other milestones that some people, they don't necessarily put pause on like their dreams, but like they defer it a little bit, if you will, or like they focus on one thing, and you've been able to have that kind of parallel for it. And so what I'm really curious about is like this pursuit of excellence that you've had for like family, career, and even like yourself. I'm curious around how you've been able to utilize some of the resources that you've been able to make those things possible.
Yeah, yeah. The interesting thing is I knew that I always wanted a family. Like I knew I wanted a life partner, a wife, a spouse. I knew I wanted children. And I didn't know like when it would all happen. And so, as you're, asking the questions, I'm thinking about it. Like I have been really fortunate in a way to like have those things while simultaneously being able to pursue my academic I guess dream of getting my degrees, getting a job, and things of that nature. But I will say that I met my wife at Unkle Lew, and so thinking about just having to go through a journey with someone else who was also going through their journey, I think was important for me. So it was like, we both right now started from the bottom. We're both kind of like struggling to figure out how can we maintain our relationship, but still not lose ourselves in our relationship, and still be able to do the things that we want to do. And so I think because we started dating young and early in like our academic and career journeys, I think it helped us because we could lean on one another, and it was still new. Like we didn't know what we were going to do. We didn't know how things were going to pan out. We just knew that we had a vision for our lives and that we were committed to one another, and we were just going to see how it panned out. And so I always think about that as, I guess, a driving force for us to be so young and know that anything that we accomplish, we are accomplishing it together, and we're building it together. And so now we can look back and say, man, look, where were we 5 years ago? And look at where we are today. And we can continue to ask those questions as we move forward. And I will say too that there were some rough patches as well. I mean, when I got married in 2015, that was I had just finished my first year of my PhD program at Penn State. My wife had finished her first year in her MPH program at George Washington in Washington, D.C. And so our first 2 years of marriage, we were separated. I was in Pennsylvania. She was living in Maryland. And so that is a different kind of, situation. I guess it adds to what we're trying to do academically, and also knowing that we are newlyweds, but we're still living apart, and we're apart by a good 3.5, 4 hours. So it's not just a quick drive to where we are living. So I do think that the motivation is that we are both trying to grind, right? We're both trying to make a better life, not only for ourselves as individuals, but ourselves as a unit, as a couple. And so that kind of helped us because we were both pushing for one another to succeed. And, when you have someone like in your corner, but also in the same boat, so they kind of know, what's going on academically, they know what's going on personally, that helps. And so it's a very fortunate story that, our lives were able to kind of intersect that way, where we were able to reach our goals academically, but also form a relationship and a marriage. But it's a blessing, man. And I think when our son was born in 2020, that's entirely different story, because we were excited for him to come, but we learned of his that he was coming before the pandemic hit. And so trying to manage the emotions of bringing a child into the world, dealing with a worldwide pandemic, but also, like, for me, I was finishing up my PhD and we were trying to move to Kentucky. Like, there was a lot of things happening all in one time.
Oh, wow.
And so to have that, support system, knowing that I had someone in my corner that I had known since I was 18, I think that helped. And so, yeah, I think, because we started so young, it's easy, I guess, in a way, for us to kind of navigate, the issues that we are managing, because it's, like, we're watching each other grow and learn as we kind of experience things.
Yeah, no, I think that's very interesting. And like, I kind of want to pause a little bit and like save this for later when you talked about self, because I think that that's very important, especially when you talk about having somebody in your corner and then having someone in your boat, in the same boat relatively, but like recognizing, I think, what corner that is, because at the same time, I think it's interesting, like when you're developing and growing as an individual, like you have to kind of get used to your own space. You know what I'm saying? Like understanding like who you are as an individual. And so like, I'm curious as far as like how you went about like learning yourself as an individual, not only through like your academic career, because it's, that seemed, it's of interest to you, but like who you are as a person, and like while also maintaining like those kind of dual responsibilities now of being a husband and being a father.
Yeah. I think, one thing about me, and I think this helped, is when I, left for Tougaloo, and as I said earlier, I'm from Michigan, going to Mississippi, that's a good 1,000 miles between,
Yeah.
my hometown and where I went to college. And once I graduated from Tougaloo, I mean, it was really, I would go home for a couple of days or a week or so, and then I'm on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, just having that mentality of I'm going to try to create a life for myself helped me navigate who I was and who I wanted to be and who I was becoming. And so, just thinking through the various ways that I, had carved out time for myself. I would drive from Michigan to Mississippi and back and forth. I would drive from Michigan to New Jersey, and just thinking about, when I was in New Jersey, when I was in Pennsylvania, although I was in a serious and committed relationship, we were more separate than we were together.
Mm.
And so that just provided time and moments for me to be me, to learn more about me, to grow and become who I am. And so now that I am, you know, in one place with a family, with a job, and we are now creating a home for ourselves and our family, I think it's again easier for us to do that because we did have those moments when we were separated.
Yeah.
And as I was growing and developing a routine and a schedule and doing things my own way, I'm sure, my wife was doing the same thing. And so now it's a way for us to just bring those things together, because we never really lost sight of ourselves and who we were for the sake of being in a relationship. It was always, oh, you want to do this, you want to get this degree, you want to pursue those things, go for it. And even if those things weren't allowing us to be in the same city, the same state at the same time, we still knew that it was, for a bigger picture. And at some point, we would be together, right? So it was never an issue on that regard. We always wanted to make sure that we were securing ourselves as individuals and being real with ourselves as individuals, because we knew that that would just create a stronger bond between us. And so, yeah, I'm thinking that, like, those moments after Tougaloo really, and when I say moments, I'm talking like 5 years. That span of 5 years, that really provided me an opportunity to just, kind of figure out life for myself, because at this point, I had developed a community at Tougaloo, and I was no longer at Tougaloo. I was no longer home. And the person that I was in a serious relationship with is no longer in my day-to-day, space. And so I really had to figure out, well, what would life be if it was just me? And I think that's an important question that everyone has to have and everyone has to kind of deal with, because it really does, make you figure things out on your own. But once you get out, once you get onto the other side, then you can at least look back and say, whatever the roadblocks were, or whatever the issues were, I came out, I'm good. And it's a learning experience for me.
Yeah, no, for sure, man. And I kind of want to touch on that a little bit more as far as just like that time period when you're creating a life for yourself or securing yourself as an individual. Like, I'm sure during that time, you grew a lot, mentally, emotionally, physically, however you would like to perceive it. And like, I'm curious around like how you navigated like some of those highs and like some of those lows, because I can imagine being in a space where you're not near your partner and like going through the challenges of graduate school, your PhD program, all of these different things. Like, it it was challenging. It could have been challenging for you. And how you grounded yourself so that you wouldn't necessarily weigh, not in the sense of like anything that would cause any detriment to your relationship, but more so to yourself. I think that that's like the key thing in itself, because it's like, as we were talking about earlier, it's kind of like yourself who branches out into these things. You decided that you wanted to pursue this English degree and pursue going to grad school. You pursued dating your now wife and all of these different things. So when you were in a space where you were literally removed from the familiarities of the community you built at Tougaloo, the familiarity of home, the familiarity of like now your now spouse, like how was that period for you? And like, how did you build that dynamic within yourself to stay firm and make it through that 5 year period?
Yeah, yeah. More good questions, and I think for me it was just as important for me to find a community outside of the community that I already had,
Mm,
and so I knew that people wouldn't be able to uh, take me out of my comfort zone in a way that will be detrimental to like what I was there for, right? So
right.
like I knew that at the end of the day, I was in this particular place because of this institution and this program. So I knew that I had to make sure that the academic stuff was going to take care of itself, and that wasn't going to no one was going to take me away from that. But I also knew that in order for me to survive it, I needed to have a community. Because if it was just straight academics, and I was lonely, like that wasn't going to fly.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was about locating and navigating these situations with people that I could trust and that I knew would be my community. And fortunately for me, while I was at Penn State, my dissertation advisor was a black man that I really looked up to, and I thought that he represented, um, all of the things that I wanted to personify as a black male professor. And so knowing that he was there, kind of showing me the ropes on the professional side, but he was also down to earth. He was also someone who would treat all of his advisees to weekly dinners. He was also one to call me and say, "Hey, did you see this basketball game last night?" He was just a well-rounded individual,
Mm,
and so having him in my corner to support me through the journey, but also forming a community with people who were also at my institution, who knew the importance of like work-life balance, right? So like they were handling their business with the academic side, but they also knew that it was just as important to eat. It was just as important to hang out and get a breath of fresh air after a long day. That was really important for me, and that also helped me to see that life is more than just the job, the work, the studies, but it's also about sustaining relationships, and developing community, and making sure that you don't feel like everything has to be isolating.
mm-hmm.
And so I would say that is um, really important. And if you don't know where Penn State is, the institution, Penn State University, it's literally in the middle of nowhere, like nowhere, Pennsylvania. And so you definitely need some outlets,
Yeah.
or some people to kind of help you, along the way. And so that was really important for me, having people that I also, saw as mentors, saw as people who were peers in a particular community, who helped me navigate life outside of academia was very important.
Yeah. So no, that's really interesting, man. I really appreciate that, especially like how you talk about like sustaining relationships. I'm curious now that like things are kind of living in the present right now. Things are kind of a little bit more stable in the sense that you and your wife are in the same space. You have your child together. How are you creating that kind of balance in yourself where it's like you're have these rising responsibilities as a husband and a father, and like still trying to sustain those relationships while also trying to build a career at the same time? I feel like
Hmm.
you have like two really important things because they really and truthfully support each other, but at the same time you want to sustain those relationships that you've built over time. And like obviously sometimes like things aren't necessarily as they all once were, in the sense of people you spoke to every single day or every so often becomes further and far between. But like, the importance of still having community, um, still being able to sustain that community, as some people say, still continuing to date your wife, all of those different type of things. How are you maintaining those like high priorities that are important for you, in your life?
Yeah, and this is a ongoing thing that I ask myself, because I do think that now that I am a father, my time is probably the most important asset that I have.
Mm,
And it's something that, before it was no problem to say, oh, I really have to get something done. Let me, wake up at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., whatever. Let me stay up later to get it done. It's done, boom. And then I can, catch up on the rest later. And, that's how I kind of navigated situations. That's how, both my wife and I kind of navigated our time around things, because we knew that it was just us. We could adjust to each other's schedules. We can, work around whatever obligations we had. And, at the end of the day, we will always be able to come back to whatever it is that we needed to. But now, as a parent, you know, the schedule is so tight, and then there's always these, things that we can't account for. Like we just never know when our son is going to wake up at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning or whatever the case may be, and we never know when he goes back. When he wakes up, is he going to go back to sleep in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 hours? Right? We
mm-hmm.
don't know if, well, on Wednesday we get a call that he's not feeling well, and he's not going to be feeling well for the next 2 3 days or whatever. And so that just, these things really take a toll on us mentally, on me mentally. It takes away from, the day-to-day tasks that I may have set aside, and the assignments or the projects or the meetings or whatever it is that I need to account for. And so I would say that this is something that I am still trying to work through. It's still a struggle, trying to be um, more strategic and smart with my time to account for the unknowns that will happen and will take away, moments of my time. And so I still have to work on that. But what I will say is it's very important for me to make sure that everybody feels like they are being seen and their needs are being met by me.
Mm,
And so what I have to do is, I know that I only have a fixed amount of time during the work week, right? Like, so when I leave my home in the morning, and the period between leaving my home and coming back in the, late afternoon, that is my window to make sure I have everything I need to get done professionally. But if it doesn't get done on that in that window, I may not get to it again, because when I get home, I know that I only have a set amount of time before my son gets sleepy and we have to put him to bed. And I know that I only have a set amount of time before I probably, get tired or want to go to bed, to spend time with my family, with my wife and my son. And so it really then makes me, have to look at my schedule and calendar and say, okay, I need to make sure that this is done. This chunk of time I do this, that, because I know when I get home, that time has to go to my family. And so this is something that's brand new to me. I'm coming from, you know, being a student really for a good chunk of my life, where it's like, okay, I can do my work during the day, come back to it, you know, take a nap, hang out for a few hours, come back to it, da. Where now my day doesn't look like that. Now I have real live human beings that I need to account for, and so I have to be very strategic on how I think about my time, because the work still needs to be done. I still have to you know do these professional tasks. I can't fall by the wayside with any of those things. So now it's really about managing my time um, in very strategic ways. And I will say though, one thing that I do want to get to at some point is, not even have to worry about work on the weekends. Give that time fully to my family. And even if it's, maybe coming back to it on a Sunday afternoon before the work week starts, so I make sure I'm fresh and ready to go. That's fine. But I want to get to the point where it's like my family knows that the work isn't the most important thing of my day. It's really spending time with them. But it's still a struggle trying to make sure that everything lines up. I'm only about 19 months into the fatherhood thing, so I'm still trying to, figure out best practices. But I will say that, the timing is the biggest struggle that I've had so far, because of the unknowns. It's like my son, we may think he's going to sleep through the night, and no, he pops up at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and now we're losing sleep trying to get him back to bed. And then that day now is kind of lagging behind. And I that's something that I never had to deal with. It's like, I never had that problem. I always found time to do what I needed to do, but now it's a totally different ball game. So I'm still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, no, I think that that's very interesting. And like to kind of circle back around like when we were talking a little bit about pursuit of excellence, I see like a little bit of that shining here, especially when you talk about pursuit of excellence, not only for like your family life, but also your professional life. Like you mentioned as far as like not being able to work on the weekends and dedicating that time towards your family and knowing, or your family knowing that it's like, the weekdays, like doing these specific hours, like I'm working and, that's what I'm doing during that time. But the weekend, I've dedicated 100% to my family. And I think that that's a very admirable goal to shoot towards, because it's like, that means that you've done the necessary work that previously you weren't able to get to because of whatever reason. You've dedicated now that you've gotten it down packed now that you can do it during the weekday and dedicate that time to your family. And like even the things that you do for your family, it amplifies itself in it as well, because it's like previously you might have had to do something for work over the weekend, or now you have more time to do more particular activities or just chill out. And like I think that is really and truthfully that goal of pursuit of excellence. And like I'm curious around what are some of the strategies that you're want to use to pursue that. Like I understand like when you were talking about like the management of the time, but like there's only 24 hours in the day, right? And like
Absolutely.
and so I'm curious around like what are some of the different like methodologies that you might experiment with to be able to get to that point to where you have that ideal balance to where your cup is as filled as possible, not only professionally, personally, and even for yourself.
Yeah, I think uh, for me, I got to go back to like the reasons why I do the work that I do,
Mm.
and it's interesting because I've always was like told that I was a good student, but the idea of like why you go to school, it was always like you want to provide the best life for yourself and for your future family. But I always thought of that like in a financial sense. I never really thought of it until years later as just like a wellness sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so like literally like being with my family makes me happy. Like it allows me to not necessarily think about uh the rigor of the job and all of the tasks I need to complete, all of the meetings I have to attend, all of the work that I have to do. It really is a way of like rejuvenation for me. And especially if I'm like killing it during the work week, I do, definitely want to take those next 2 days just to kind of decompress, relax, ease my mind, ease my body, and then try to, rejuvenate myself for the upcoming week. And so I think just getting into that mindset is something that has helped me. Just the understanding that I don't have to do work all the time.
Mm.
Like I know, it's important. It's important for me to work. Working allows, me to pay my bills, to, eat and, do the things that I need to do. I'm grateful for my job. I'm grateful for the work that I am doing. But I also see that work, as meaningless if I'm also not being present in the lives of my family.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just a shift of, perspective for me of just seeing, well, why am I even doing this work? What is the long-term goals and the long-term ends for it? And it's like, if I can't literally just take 48 hours for myself, then is it even worth it? And I think, that was something that I have to kind of contend with. Like if I just don't get to it today, will things still be fine? And most likely the answer is yes. Even if I have to take a little bit more time with something, or even if I need an extension on something, I'm constantly thinking about, that part of work culture, and just shifting my mindset around that. And so I would say, another thing that I've learned to do is just like, I love technology. I love my phone, love my tablet, love my laptop, love the TV. I love it all. But just understanding that, like, sometimes you got to turn those things off. And so something that I've recently, started doing is just like putting time limits on, like, the apps on my phone, like turning off notifications, because that allows me to just kind of like be very, um, uh, you know, I don't even know the word I'm trying to say. Like, I'm just spending my time on one thing and not necessarily being distracted on whatever is happening on my device. And so this works both ways. Like, professionally, it works great. So if I, turn my notifications off, I'm not being distracted as I do my work. And then that's increases the likelihood of me, getting the work done in a particular time or a particular, part of my day, which is awesome. And then on the flip side, when I am at home with my family or whatnot, I don't have anything distracting me from my time with them. And so I'm just trying to be, very intentional on, like, just daily practices, because as you said, there's only 24 hours in the day, and I like to sleep. So I know a third of that I'm trying to, catch them Z's. So I have to be very intentional on what I'm doing when I am awake, so I can, like, maximize my time for whatever it is that I'm doing.
Yeah, man. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I really appreciate you just dropping a lot of those gems, man. Like, I knew whenever the idea of, like, getting you on the show was first thinking about it, I was like, I gotta have my mentor on here, and I gotta have just hear some of the things that you have to say about just this whole balancing of life kind of thing, because I think that's something that we all struggle with, especially with, like, when it comes to just life in general, and, like, pursuing our careers, pursuing love, pursuing, like, our families, not only, like, the families that we're building, but, like, the families that we were blessed with, or the families that we adopted, like friends and things of that nature. And, like,
Yeah.
I've always appreciated, like, just your perspective on life, and, like, I figured, which, it came to be true, that you were going to drop some gems. So I just want to share my appreciation that I have for you being on the show today, man.
Oh man, it's no thing. Anything you need, you got it from me, and I just appreciate the invitation to be on, and just to share some things with you and your audience. And so, anytime, just let me know what you need from me.
All right, sounds good. Well, I usually have these lightning questions that I like to do at the end of every episode, and so I'm gonna run through these real quickly with you and let you get back to the rest of your day, man.
All right, sounds good.
All right, what's your favorite relaxation or self-care activity?
Uh, it's watching a good television show, good movie, on the couch, just sitting back and relaxing.
Hey, man, I ain't nothing wrong with that at all. Your best book recommendation?
Whoo, yeah. So this is a difficult question for an English professor. Uh, very difficult. But what I will say is, I'm just going to share the book that I read that probably like just changed the game for me. It's an interesting book. It's a novel. Richard Wright, Native Son.
Yeah.
That book I read when I was like, you know, 21, 22, and it changed the game for me because it was about this young black boy growing up in Chicago, poor, pretty much written off, and just zoning in on his day-to-day life and how he's struggling to be himself. He has all these pressures in the world. In the book, I mean, Richard Wright is one of the greatest writers of all time, and so the book really just takes us through, this life of this boy named Bigger Thomas, and what ultimately happens to him. It's an unfortunate thing. HBO just actually did a little remix of it a couple of years ago. But Native Son, that's the book, and I think it really just gives you a very grim picture of black maleness, but also the struggle that black men have of trying to carve out a place for themselves in the United States. But yeah, Native Son, that book pretty much changed the game for me, and I definitely think everyone should read it.
No, man, I appreciate that. And lastly, one person you want to thank for your journey thus far?
Oh man, so again, this is a difficult one. As I said throughout the podcast, I'm here. Anything that I did is because of the communities that I was brought up in. I mean, just knowing that my family supported me going down to Tougaloo, knowing that I had a Tougaloo family that inspired me to do greater and bigger things. I met my wife at Tougaloo, who has been there every step of the way since I was 18 years old. Like, come on, Melvin, one person. Met you at Tougaloo. You was in my wedding. Come on, man. I can't have one person. But I will say, every place that I have gone, I've had support, and that's one thing that I'm never going to say is that I did this all by myself. Look at all the things that I accomplished. I couldn't do any of the things that I've done without support, without mentorship, without people saying I could do it, believing in me. And even if they're not telling me, I know that I could rely on them at any stage. And so we just gonna say the whole crew, everybody who has had contact with me, who has supported me, who I've been in community with. Thank you. That's how I'm answering that question.
No, man, that sounds good. That's a great way to answer it. I think earlier on, someone answered the question with God because of all the people that he's blessed them with in their life. So what's it called, man?
Absolutely.
I totally understand that. Man. Well, I'm going to let you get back to the rest of your day. And once again, just want to thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Of course, it's been another episode of Don't Be Coy with Unkle Lew. As always, I'd like to thank this episode's guest for a great conversation, as well as thank you, the listener, for joining in. Whether you're a first-time listener or a regular, I always appreciate your support. If you like today's episode and ever want to listen to more, subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. And to join our community and access future bonus content, be sure to visit dbkpodcast.com.